Hey, I'm Rachel.
And I'm Amanda, and this is Beyond a Ballot.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Beyond a Ballot podcast. I'm your host, Amanda, here with my co-host, Rachel. Hi, Rachel.
Hello. How are you?
I'm so good. What a week it's been.
Always another week in politics. What a week it's been.
But it's always particularly exciting when we get an election in the mix.
Yeah,
so
no kidding. Especially this week's election.
We have a lot to cover, a lot to talk about. But this week, we're doing something a bit different.
Mm-hmm.
We have a guest co-host.
Yay!
I know, so exciting. Sarbjit Kaur, hi, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me on, guys. This is so fun.
We're so happy to have you. For those of you who don't know her, she's a journalist, a former political staffer, and now a co-founder of KPW Communications.
Mm-hmm.
I've known you for a long time, but it's really a delight to have you as one of the first guests and co-hosts on the show. So I think for our listeners, would you mind sharing a little bit about you, maybe how you got involved in politics, what brings you to this podcast? Tell us about you.
Sure. I started out in media. I went to school for print journalism and I worked in the field for a bit. And it's funny how I ended up in politics because I used to profile successful people in the community for this little community newspaper that I was like the editor, writer, photographer, sales, everything. And one of the people that I interviewed, I did a profile on him. He ended up years later becoming the first South Asian cabinet minister. And he calls me one day and he's like, what are you up to now? Because I had left the newspaper and I'm like, oh, I just, have a kid. She's 1 year old. I'm raising my kid. And he's like, okay, but what are you doing that's like useful?
Oh my God.
He's like, why don't you come work for me? So I was one of the first staffers that was in the McGuinty government. He was appointed transportation minister. And I stayed with him. I started out as kind of a junior communications assistant, moved up. He traveled to like 4 different ministries and I followed him around. We went to small business. We went to consumer services. We went to government services. I had another kid and did a stint in the bureaucracy for a bit. And then I finally left, and that's been like more than 10 years now, and started doing PR and consulting. And so still involved in politics, worked on a lot of federal campaigns, municipal campaigns. I mean, you girls know once you're in, you never really completely get out. But it's fun, and we have our little political family, and very, very useful background.
You should have asked that minister to take your 1-year-old for a few days and see how they did with the 1-year-old. What a job that is.
Yeah.
It's a fun fact that this year is 20 years since that McGuinty campaign.
Oh, I feel old.
20 years this month.
Wow.
And so if you were on Instagram, there were a lot of posts for those of us who were involved in that campaign or got our start in politics. A lot of people got their start in politics from the circles that we know. And so it was kind of fun to go down a bit of memory lane, but it's hard to believe the 20 years have gone by since he won the election and went on to serve for 11 years.
And for those that don't know, Dalton McGuinty was the premier of Ontario for a very long time.
I think he was.
I can actually tell you, I have it right in front of me. 11 years.
Premiers. Yeah.
Yes, 11
and
years.
Then the
he was the premier.
Carried on. Yeah.
That's right, under Kathleen Wynne, exactly. And that's a great segue into our topic for this opening segment, because you and I, Amanda, have talked a lot about the concept of whether or not governments expire. And we want to just preface this whole conversation by saying we're not speaking specifically about one government, but all governments at all levels. So provincial governments, federal governments, municipal governments. And even this week, of course, we noted off the top that Manitoba had a big change in government after 7 years. Our federal government has been in power for 8 years. Prior to that, the Harper government was in power for 9 years. And I just want to note in BC here, we had the BC Liberals in power, our provincial government, for 16 years before the NDP came into power in 2018. So let's talk about it. Let's have a chat. Do governments expire? What do you think? Sarbjit, what do you think?
Oh, I'm first. I would say yes. I think they definitely do, except at the municipal level. For the municipal
Hmm.
level, for some reason, you know, if you get over the first two terms, you can stay there for life if you're a mayor.
It's true.
But I think otherwise, yeah, they do. And in a way, it's sometimes it gets to a point. I liken it to like a relationship, right?
Mm.
Where after a while, you know, you everything could be going right, but you're just kind of tired of seeing the same people. You almost want to spice it up. And then sometimes you see like people going to extremes, and you see this where they elect people like, you know, Rob Ford was a very, very eccentric, interesting choice for mayor of Toronto. And people
Mm-hmm.
will go to the opposite extreme. I mean, certainly the Liberal government, even after the leadership change, I mean, I've always felt Kathleen Wynne didn't get a fair shake. There was nothing
Mm-hmm.
that she was doing or not doing that I feel like warranted such a reaction from the electorate. Um, but I would also say that there are ways that governments can refresh themselves, keep themselves relevant,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes if the alternative is either seen as not a very good alternative, then you still have a chance to prolong that life term, to resuscitate that
I was
relationship.
actually talking about Kathleen Wynne yesterday with my father-in-law because of what happened in Manitoba, that Heather Stephenson is no longer premier. She served one term. She was the first female premier of Manitoba. And we were discussing whether or not female premiers get a harder run in re-election, because you know, you talk about Kathleen Wynne, I'll talk about Christy Clark out here in British
Mm-hmm.
Columbia. We see a lot of one-term female premiers in this country. Do you
Mm-hmm.
think that that plays into uh, these governments expiring according to the electorate? Amanda, what do you
Oh,
think?
me.
Anyone
Uh,
jump in.
No, you know, I think this is what I think. I think a couple of things. I think that governments do expire, and some of them expire because they should, because things are going poorly, or because, you know, there's been a big scandal that's rocked them.
Mm,
I do think that we're a little fickle as an electorate,
mhm.
and we get a little antsy. And I agree with Sarbjit. I think that we so much so that we actually, our slogans are all created when you're in opposition around this idea of change, right? It's like real change or choose change. I mean, we're putting it out there well before an election that
Right.
people, it's time for a little change. Who doesn't like a little change,
Mm-hmm.
right? And whether it's to spice it up, or because you're tired of seeing what you're seeing, or because you believe that the policies aren't working, I do think that there's a place of, I want to call it boredom, but I think that there's a little bit of a malaise that sets in for people, which is strange, because if you think about the private sector, it's really the opposite.
Mm.
When do companies hit their
Yeah, it's a
stride?
good point.
You know, it's not in the first year or two.
Mm-hmm.
And the same, I would argue, should be true of government. There's a learning curve as you get into government. There's a lot that, that needs to happen. And it takes time for any of the policies that have been promised during election to come into fruition. And yet we have this sense that at like the 6 or the 8 year mark, it's been a long haul and we should oust them. Something very different than what we do in the private sector, which is we build companies and we're looking for the knowledge and the experience, and we value that of companies who have had a long runway. So I don't know, does anyone else agree with that? Do you think that's true?
I think, you know, when you talk about antsiness, I often wonder when we talk about this question of expiring as to whether it's the government that expires or the policies that expire, because
Mm.
governments come in on big promises. I'll take this federal government currently. You know, it was democratic reform in 2015, environmental issues. So the government agendas come in during campaigns, and then
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to switch them. It's hard to adapt to the times after 7 years in government to then rejig your policy agenda. And so I wonder if, for me, in my mind, this question really sits on that as to whether or not governments get antsy towards policy priorities at the 7 year mark, or if they're, some have done it. I mean, let me throw in a trivia question here. Does anyone know what the longest government in Canada was?
I do know because I was arguing with somebody. It's like it was more than 100 years
Yes.
ago.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah.
you're right.
No, not quite
Because
100.
somebody
Almost
was.
100.
Not quite, but close. Yeah.
1930.
Is there a W
Which?
in his name? Is there a W in his name?
Let me look.
Ish.
The longest government in Canadian history was a Liberal government from 1935 to 1957 under two prime ministers, Mackenzie King and then Louis Saint Laurent. So, going back to the policy agenda, this government lasted 22 years in the 1930s to 50s, but it was a different leader. And so if you don't change leaders, as we've seen a lot of in governments provincially, federally over the last couple of decades, that it's traditionally the same leader, does the policy agenda go stale? Sarbjit, what do you think?
Okay, couple of thoughts. There's like three different topics in there, all very interesting. Women, I'd say yes, across the board. The society we live in, women have it tougher for everything. The response that you get, the level of criticism and comments, and just the tone of it, I do think that women get a different response and a different kind of reception, and it's tougher for them. Policies, surprisingly enough, I think more and more we're seeing that there isn't that much difference in the major political parties and their policies. And I always kind of laugh when people say they're going to change so much. You're working with the same budgets, you have the same tax base, the same budgets. The healthcare budget and the healthcare challenges are going to, whether you're a liberal or a conservative, you have the same tools to work with. And so it's almost like a 10-20% difference. And I'd say those things are values types of, what does the party stand for? Is it about inclusivity, or is it more about changing the tone to be like Canada first, or, every man, woman, and child for themselves, which is more just rhetoric and playing to people's emotions. I think when it comes to policy, they're all quite similar. There are a couple of big things, though, I would say. For example, the Liberal government that Amanda and I work for, full day kindergarten. That is a huge policy piece that it would have been very different from, whether it was a conservative party. But other than that, I felt like, and to answer your other question about reaching its stride, yeah, it was only till we reached, I'd say, the third ministry that I really understood how to deal with the bureaucracy, how to navigate this huge complex government. Things like they used to do this thing like, oh, if you want that, you have to send it to legal. And I realized after a while, sending it to legal is code for we don't want to do this, and let's go bog it down in legal for 6 months. Right. And then by that time I knew to be like, sorry, why do we need to send it to legal? Why? Is it an actual is this a legal problem, or is this a suggestion? Yeah. And then you just start, so if you think that that's when you're starting to learn,
totally.
Sometimes you see young staffers and they're like, oh, they told us we're not allowed to do this, or we can't do that. It's like, listen, accountability lies with you. So you're the one who gets to ask the questions and get things done, because if some ministry staffer is saying no, 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 and then things hit the fan, they're not on the ballot, then they're going to be like hands off. So it's interesting. Even as a staffer, it takes you a while to learn to navigate everything. And then by that time, maybe you're gone.
It's funny because I agree. And I think that having worked in government, as we both have, all three of us have, and so having witnessed it from the inside, we understand that idea of hitting the stride, really digging in and having a chance to make change. I remember working for the Ministry of Education in Ontario, and it was approaching the second term when we were able to do things like reduce class sizes and talk about things like school choice. And, these were ideas at the election, but it takes 4 years, years and years sometimes to get them to fruition. But we also know that the reason why governments, quote unquote, expire is because of the temperature of the electorate. How are we all feeling? How are our pocketbooks feeling? Have we dealt with a big crisis like a pandemic? How did the government handle that? And I think that the state, how's the economy,
Mhm.
things that make us feel a certain way about power, which may or may not change if that power changes hands. But it certainly gives us a reason, especially if we're feeling kind of angry, or if we're feeling distrust, or if we're feeling any way sensitive about what the government's doing. It's a good way for us to talk about that word change. Maybe if we just change up the election, things will feel a little better in our home.
But I think that this week demonstrated as well that it's also about the campaign, because typically, you see, and I'm referencing the Manitoba election where they went from a PC government to now an NDP government. But you see in these harder economic times that you typically have more right-leaning governments. You would think that if the PCs had run on a message of affordability, instead of I'm going to say, scouring to the NDP message of specific policy issues, wedge issues, then maybe they would have still been in government, because ultimately the campaign played such a big part of that change as well. So I think that when we talk about changing governments after a long time, a lot of it is also the campaign strategy and how we can frame ballot box questions. But I think you made a good point. A lot of times we get into government and then we hit that stride, but also something major happens that we didn't anticipate. I mean, I'm thinking of George W. Bush in the United States with September 11th. That was a massive shift. I'm thinking about Stephen Harper in 2006 and then the 2008 economic crash. I remember being in the Harper government in 2008 when we were doing Canada's economic action plan, and we were investing tons of money in infrastructure and trying to keep the economy afloat. But that wasn't really what we had campaigned on in 2006. And then obviously, the Trudeau government and going to the ballot box in 2021 about their way that they handled COVID-19. So I think that the campaign does play in as well. And what do you think, Sarbjit? Just throwing that over you.
For sure. And I'm also going to say that it's not always bad, like from, why there's term limits in the United States, because you do want to shake things up. And you would even notice from when you're dealing with government, from the time that they're in opposition and they're very hungry and, they're answering every phone call, they're going to every event, they're really, doing whatever they can. And then they get a little comfortable. I noticed, some of the ministers, they would get kind of cynical. They would get kind of jaded. I mean, they're going to so many events. They're being inundated with calls. And, I noticed just even dealing with government, and sometimes it's like, well, the opposition people are more responsive, but because they're still, hungry for, that opportunity. So, sometimes I think it's good to have that change or that threat of change. It keeps people on their toes. It keeps politicians active, answering people's calls, being responsive. I think there's a real danger when people get out of touch with the grassroots. And that's when you see that sometimes there's a disconnect, that you've been in government for so long that you've kind of lost the grassroots. But not always. I mean, there's some people who just, they will serve their community and be an excellent representative for their constituents, so that governments can come and go and they're still there. And that's usually because of their grassroots work in the community, and they're such a well-known entity.
Do you think?
And then you have the opposite, right? You have the cult of personality, where some people you just don't understand. You keep voting for them. You think of a Donald Trump. Think of a Hazel McCallion, who was the longest serving mayor. People loved her, but if you looked at her actual policies, she got away with a lot because she was this cute little old grandma, and it was a cult of personality.
I'm going to throw Rob Ford in there too.
Wrong.
He was reelected.
Yeah.
People loved him.
Do you think that if the idea that a government is expiring, media are writing about it, commentators are talking about it, do you think it's possible? I think I know what you'll say to this, Sarbjit, but do you think it's possible to turn it around? Can you put a fresh coat of paint on something that people feel has passed its expiry date?
And I was going to ask, what's the messaging from that government?
I think you can. And there's two things that I think can turn it around. One is some issue emerges that you get to jump on. And I remember it was the election when they had we framed it as two-tier citizenship. The conservatives were trying to change it so that you could revoke people's citizenships. And I think there was the niqab ban.
Yes.
So they kind of gave us a gift
Right.
of these two highly, highly contentious issues that took over. And we made a lot of hay out of that. People were worried when you started looking at it. The Civil Liberties Association got involved. People were like, they're going to revoke our citizenship. That's not fair. Or why is, if you're born in this country, you can commit a crime and you stay. But if you weren't born here, you can get deported. So there was like an issue. And with the provincial, I remember it was John Tory in Ontario wanted to fund private religious schools beyond Catholic. And that was the issue. As soon as you knocked on the door and you mentioned that, everything changed.
That's right.
The second thing, so it's like there could be an issue. And the second thing, I think, is just who's your opponent.
Right.
So if you're not happy with the person, say it's the same with the relationship. Maybe your husband's not the best, but then you go out to the bar and you're like, oh God, we'll just stick with this person.
Grass is not always greener.
I mean, okay, he's not the most exciting, but he's stable, he's honest, he's okay.
So good.
And then you go out there and you're like, and I feel like Pierre Poilievre is like that guy, where it's like the alternative might just give people a headache, where they're like, okay, we want change, but I don't know about him.
Right.
Maybe not him. So it's going to be a combination of key issues.
Yes.
That you get to really talk about what you've done and your record, like you talked about economy. I mean, if people stick to reminding people of what they've done for them, like child tax benefit, full day kindergarten, national dental program, like we might get a pharmacare program. That is real stuff that's helping people. And sometimes you have to remind people of what you've done because they forget or they take it for granted. And if you can make that your message and really remind people that you are not going to do better, they're going to maybe roll back the child benefit or whatever tax break they're promising you doesn't add up the math. And then B is just the other guy. Like, is he better than me? Maybe I'm not the best, or maybe you're tired of looking at my face, but
as a political strategist,
really
I would never tell a politician to say, maybe I'm not the best, but look at the other.
Maybe there's something in that, though.
But it's the mentality.
Yes.
But it's the mentality,
Yes.
right? That's what people are thinking. Like, who's the other guy? Is he better? No. Like, maybe he's a bridge too far.
That's right.
Do you think that electorates have become more fickle? Like, are we a fickle people in that we also are we're expiring in terms of our patience for governments?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that social media has contributed to that.
Huge.
Our attention span has contributed to that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, reality TV has contributed to that. We're in a high volume, high consumption type world where we consume quickly and we move on. And I think that has a trickle effect into everything, including politics, where we're ready for next. We're ready to swipe left or swipe right, depending on our mood. And you can see that actually in the polls as well, when you watch the polls fluctuate the way that they can. And I think that if you were to look back 20 years, we wouldn't see that kind of fluctuation that quickly. It's a good example to look at this summer. We saw, we'll use Poilievre again, an excellent job by the Conservative Party, who invested a lot into ads to kind of rehabilitate his vibe, how he was presenting himself to the world, to Canadians. And Canadians responded. That was one ad buy. Mm-hmm. Canadians responded in the polls. Now, in the polling. Now, would that translate into an election turnover? We don't know because we're not there. But I would say we're open, and I think we're fickle. I think things have changed a little.
Yeah, and
I would also say the tone of the conversation has become so less so polarizing. Mm-hmm. The things that we're talking about, the words that we're using, like we didn't live in a time when people had like F Trudeau bumper stickers until recently. We didn't have people protesting outside of schools and politicians egging them on and kind of picking these niche wedge issues. There was a director of communications tweet the other day, something about how we are in a totalitarian, autocratic state. I'm like, really? We're in a totalitarian state? Wow. I didn't know we were Saudi Arabia. So it's like the tone.
The
Everybody is just
sensationalizing.
yeah. And I don't know if when you kind of lower that bar, you can bring it back up. But misinformation, social media, they're trying to eat kittens or whatever is happening, turn our kids this and that.
I guess,
so it's a different kind of tone, I think.
William Lyon Mackenzie King didn't really have Instagram during his time.
No.
Probably didn't have bots.
That's probably why he was prime minister.
Twitter trolls.
He was prime minister for 21 years. That's probably why.
That's exactly why.
Yeah. He didn't have a Twitter army of trolls.
Yep. But, we're running out of time here, but I want to just wrap up this conversation with the other side, which is, we also can leverage social media for good, for changing policy directions for long-term governments, or that cult of personality has helped. And I'm going to use the current prime minister as an exact example of that, where a lot of times where we've seen this government have bigger issues, we've seen the personality of Trudeau and the cult of Trudeau kind of come in and change the narrative. So I think that there is some benefit to the world we're living in when it comes to this conversation as well.
100%. I think social media has been a great equalizer, and most people are getting their news off of that. If we could actually just clear it out of the people who have a very specific, like literally fake accounts and bots, and have good conversations on there, it would be amazing and useful and such a great tool to allow people to reach people and keep up to date and have their voice heard.
Amanda, any last words before we end this convo?
Well, I would agree. I think that one of the things we talked about in our first episode, which is something that I'd like to do an entire episode on, is how this affects women, particularly women's involvement in politics. And that could be involvement in terms of interest, but it could also be involvement in terms of like time or putting your name on a ballot, and how the climate, that quick turnover climate or that social media climate, how does that affect a woman's choice to get engaged? So that's too big of a question to ask as we're wrapping, but I do think it's something that I'd like to consider, and maybe Sarbjit, we can have you back to talk about that topic, because I know that you're passionate about that one too.
We're really big on dinner parties.
I have a lot of thoughts.
I know, right? It's a good one.
We're really big on dinner parties, so we'll have another dinner party and we'll invite you back to chat about that.
We'd love that.
Nice. Thank you.
All right. We are going to take a very quick break, but I want to thank Sarbjit so much for joining us and being our first co-host. How was it?
Wow. I had so much fun, guys. Time flew.
You were so good.
Yeah.
You are, well, obviously former journalist, commentator, communications expert. You were a delight to have on the show with such smart insights. So thank you so much for being a part of it.
And we're going to come right back.
Great topics.
We're going to come right back, and we are going to talk about that change of government in Manitoba. Stay tuned. This week was the highly anticipated election in Manitoba, where we saw a change in government from a PC to an NDP government. Heather Stephenson is out as premier from the PCs, and Wab Kinew from the NDP is in. Here to tell us all about it are two women who know Manitoban politics very well. They are Logan Ross, who has had long time involvement with the Manitoba PCs and worked for former PC Premier Brian Pallister, and Emily Couttes, who is the brand new Principal Secretary for now Premier-elect Wab Kinew, and during the campaign was political director for the NDP. So Emily, Logan, so awesome to have you guys both here. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having us. Happy to be here. Thank you.
So we are fresh off of the campaign. You are fresh off of the campaign. I just watched the campaign. But you guys were... Emily, you were very involved in the campaign. Logan, I'm sure you were watching quite closely, given your ties to the Manitoba PCs. I'm just going to, let you guys have 5 minutes to talk about your connection to your parties and how you've been involved with them. So why don't we start with you, Logan, and your involvement with the Manitoba PCs?
Sure, yeah, for sure. So I started working for the Manitoba PCs when we were in opposition. I started getting involved around, I think around 2014, 2015. And I was a part of the 2016 and 2019 elections. In 2016, I worked on all the rural target seats because even though PCs or conservatives tend to hold a lot of rural seats, at that time we didn't. After a not a great 2011 election, so that time we actually did have quite a few target seats in the rural ridings that we were targeting to win in order to win government. And then in 2019, I was in charge of scripting and tour on the 2019 election. So making sure scripting is pretty ambiguous, but it's essentially working with policy, comms, everyone, campaign manager, platform development, and rolling out what kind of the vision of the campaign looks like. Making sure you're telling your story. You have proper announcements that you're constantly reviewing and revisiting based on other things that are going on in the campaign, because things always need to be adjusted when the NDP makes a different announcement or in response to whatever announcement. And so that's the role I had in 2019. And then in January 2020, which I find a really interesting time. So I actually moved out to Manitoba full time at the end of January 2020. And I was originally hired to do long-term strategic planning for government in the Premier's office.
In January of 2020.
Yeah. I moved from downtown Toronto out to Winnipeg. And then within 6 weeks, my job became COVID full time, and I actually ran all of the COVID response and COVID communication, stakeholder relations for the province.
Oh, wow!
And then I switched over to the vaccination task force as well. So I did all of that before
Good on
before
you.
leaving. It was a very interesting time. I learned a lot. Learned a lot in a very short period of time, and worked very closely with, it was interesting, right? Because even though I was, political staff working in the Premier's office, senior political staff in the Premier's office, I actually didn't really spend that much time with political staff because of COVID. I spent most of my time with public servants and the chief public health officer, and I got a really unique experience in government for sure.
Yeah, no kidding. Especially coming in right before the pandemic when everything shut down. Amanda and I in the segment before this were actually just talking about that, when governments come in and then something major happens in the world and totally shifts the entire policy agenda that they ran on, that they came in on. So
everything changed.
Yeah, obviously. Everything changed. All right, Emily. I just want to say it's awesome that you are officially Principal Secretary to the Premier, and we're so thrilled to have you here and talking about your experience. So congratulations to you. Why don't you tell us about your involvement with the NDP?
Yeah, so I'll take a long story and make it kind of short. Basically, I started working in politics because I took a political science degree at the University of Winnipeg, and I wanted like a year off to just stop, working in retail stores and to like make a salary. And so I took an internship at the Legislative Assembly, which is technically a nonpartisan internship. And they hire 6 interns, and they put 3 with the opposition and 3 with the government. And they put me with the government at the time, which was the NDP. And that was in 2015, which is the last year the NDP was in power, before a pretty massive defeat, partly from Logan's hard work. And I sort of fell in love with like politics. I got, a lot of the political staffers kind of took me under their wing, and I really found a home there. And so when the election happened, I volunteered and knocked on doors, and then when we lost, think about losing government, which I'm like deeply familiar with. having kind of had that imprinted on myself as a really young political staffer, is that you go from this like huge staff, we had like over 100 staff, like political staff working in the legislative building. And we went down to, I think it was like less than 10.
Oh my God.
And the caucus office, which was the only like remaining office, is full of people who don't necessarily do the political work of government. They mostly act as support for the MLAs. So a lot of their work doesn't deal with the kind of like, backroom politics that we think about a lot. So I remember sitting in the meeting room getting like briefings from former political staff. And I just remember them handing us, notebooks with like their kind of advice on how to handle like media requests and, question period and these really complex tasks, and just kind of being like, good luck,
Best of luck.
So, yeah. And so I, just because it happened that interns at the Legislative Assembly for the NDP often were tasked with writing speaking notes for the ministers when they stood up and spoke to bills. We wrote a set of notes that were then, edited deeply by other political staff. So it ended up being I was the only one left who had any semblance of an understanding of how the House worked. And so they asked me to stay on and help out with question period. And then from there, I sort of worked in policy, question period, House business for a bit, which was not a good fit for me because it's like such a chess game and I am not that much of a logical thinker. And so in the end, Wab became the leader. He was like elected leader of the party shortly after that. And then a few months after that, he asked me to be his press secretary, and I've been doing comms for him ever since. So that was like almost 8 years ago.
And then what?
And I worked in the last...
Sorry, yep.
Yeah, I worked in the last campaign in 2019, kind of running media for him. And we did not win that election. And then in this campaign, I sort of moved away from the communications position. Like I'm definitely thinking more strategically. Sounds like a lot like what Logan was hired to do initially for government before COVID took over. Thinking more strategically, taking a bird's eye view to the comms, thinking of the overall narrative, talking a lot about how to brand Wab as kind of like a brand, basically.
I think he has become a brand.
Oh yeah.
I want to dive into that, but yeah. So you were with the campaign day to day during the election that happened just a few days ago.
Yep, I like myself, along with Rebecca Whitcomb, who was our director of communications in the campaign, and Mark Rosner, who's our chief of staff. Like the three of us were sort of, and plus alongside some like very fantastic like field and org senior staff, helped to kind of shape the campaign from the very beginning.
Okay, so I was just telling you about when I worked on the Mayor of Vancouver's campaign, and now almost a year ago, we ended up winning. There was a change in government. It was my biggest win because we swept every seat. Can you tell us?
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. And now I'm retired from campaigning. No, I'm just kidding. But I should stop.
You're like, leave on a high note. You're like George Costanza,
exactly.
Just leave on a high note.
Done. That's it. I've done the best I can. Never again. But talk to us about what that feels like to win government after having a PC government for a number of years. Now this big flip. What does it feel like on election night?
Honestly, like election night was surreal, and I think I'm still struggling to honestly kind of like wrap my head around it. And one thing maybe the listeners might not realize is that in every election campaign, at least one where there is a very strong chance or a decent chance that you could form government, you have to be responsible with that fact, right? So there will be a transition team that is sort of working quietly in the background to prepare should you win government. And if you don't win, then all of that work just gets thrown out. So it's kind of like it's wild high stakes. But so when in the days leading up to the election, we were talking a lot about like what happens if we win. And so I was in this weird headspace of kind of like, okay, like if we win, then I mean the work is unbelievable. and the challenge in front of us is huge. And so election night itself was a really surreal experience because you're partly feeling this like intense relief. Like I've been working on this thing for almost 8 years, you know. It was just like this intense visceral like relief, like ecstatic joy that he had actually made it happen. I'm so used to him being the leader. I'm so used to like the idea that we could elect the first First Nations premier, but having so many people kind of say it back to me was like a very weird out of body experience. So that itself was like hard to kind of, it was like hard for that to sink in. And then at the same time, I just remember thinking like, oh my God, I have to work tomorrow.
I hope you had a little fun in between.
I was very responsible, and I had one beer, and I went to bed at 2 because I had to wake up and do media with him the first.
Yeah, and people don't realize how tired you are by election night. You're like, I would do anything for 2 nights of sleep.
Couldn't speak. Yeah.
All right, Logan, I want to go to you and talk about the PC campaign, because this has been since election night, this has been the big topic of discussion. What happened with the PCs? I'm just going to put that to you. What happened with the PC campaign?
I am happy to break it down. So
please.
So look, going into the election, kind of, beginning of August, early, I guess I'll start early in the year. The NDP and Wab Kinew's approval ratings, they were quite high. And Heather Stephenson, and the PC party was quite low. And that was, kind of January, February, let's say, kind of in there. And it looked, if you were to look back a year, the results that happened in this in the election that just happened, it's almost identical to the numbers that they were showing. And then what ended up happening is the PCs, they did some staffing changes in early January. They released a budget that was, well received, and they started to climb back up in the polls. They did a lot of, going, when you're government, that's always, it's always a little bit of an advantage because you get to announce a lot of big money things before the election period starts. And they were, rising in the polls because of that. Now, Heather's personal approval ratings they continued to decline, but the overall the party numbers were rising. And then right before kind of August, just before August, the numbers were essentially tied. Like it was, anyone that had asked me, even though I kind of felt like the NDP were probably going to pull back ahead a little bit there, anyone that asked, I said, it's tied. I have no idea. I can't give you an answer. And so to me, that means that there was a path to victory for anybody. And, and I think that, it was a very weird election. I think that, during the month of August really set the stage, and that was before the election campaign, like the real period had started. And, I think the NDP, kudos to Emily. They did fantastic. Like there's not like, I've worked on countless numbers of campaigns across different provinces and federally. And, this was one of the best campaigns I've ever seen. And, you
maybe for our listeners, what is it specifically that made this campaign so outstanding from your perspective? For sure. And then I want to go to Emily and ask you that too.
For sure. Yeah. And so look, the NDP had planned and prepared, and during the month of August, when most people in Manitoba aren't paying attention because they're all at the lake or camping or doing outdoor things and enjoying the summer, the NDP and Wab Kinew and Emily and the team, they were out making very good policy announcements that resonated. Not, I would say, as someone that's, not an NDP voter, resonated across the political spectrum. I think the announcements were great. And they really took advantage of that August period. And what that allowed them to do is honestly set the direction of the entire campaign, because they were the ones out there showing that they, were ready to lead. They had all these ideas. They were great ideas. And unfortunately, during that month, the PCs largely remained silent. They didn't make very many announcements. They actually only made one. And the announcement was parental rights and education. And that was not what this campaign was
Very
about.
Controversial topic.
And so, Emily and Wab and the team and everyone, they were out making big announcements about healthcare and cutting the provincial taxes and freezing hydro rates, and all of these things resonated with Manitobans. And very quickly they controlled what I believe is, the ballot question and the campaign.
Yeah.
Or they said
ballot
it.
question. Yeah, exactly. Framing that ballot question, being the first to do it is such a strategic move, critical move
smart.
in any campaign. Emily, what do you think? What did you guys do right?
Everything.
We won.
Everything. We won.
Who knows how we got here? I think that, so like what I've heard a lot of people say back to me about why they thought this campaign was really well done was message discipline. And that purely just means that like, we knew that we wanted this campaign. I mean, Logan's very, very graciously mentioning some of our other big cost of living and commitments, but our main commitment was really on healthcare. And we just had like a series of, from very big, like reopening emergency rooms that had closed under the PC government, to pretty small, like, making birth control coverage universal. We sort of made a whole bunch of commitments on healthcare, and we just said healthcare over and over and over and over and over and over again. And by like sheer force of will, we made the election basically about healthcare. And I think that was like a very smart strategic choice that we discussed deeply throughout the campaign, in the beginning and throughout the campaign, and like was not without lack of trying. Like I think something that we were, I have a dog and she might jump up on me, just so you know. Just to get involved.
We're
like,
pet friendly.
I think something that maybe yeah, good. I think something maybe your listeners might not realize is that there is an absolute beast that you have to feed every single day in a campaign, and that is the media. And they are constantly looking for something new to say. Every single day of a campaign is an opportunity for them to say, the NDP announced this and the PCs announced that. And what can happen then is that you can sort of like create a whole beautiful announcement. You set yourself up into a beautiful, like you're in front of a great location. You have amazing validators, which is what we call like normal people who support your policy, standing with you. You've got like this beautiful set of speaking notes. You have all this literature that goes out to accompany it, and the journalists report on it. And then the next day, it's like it never happened. And the average person who, especially the average woman or average mom who's trying to pay attention to politics, but can really only absorb like one or two things a week at best, is probably going to miss it. So our focus of this campaign was really about trying to like reach out to the voter and say, like, we care about healthcare. And even if you can't keep up with the individual announcements that we're making, you're smart enough to understand the general like shape and trajectory of our campaign. And you'll know that when you think Wab Kinew, you're going to think healthcare. And that's kind of like what we really tried to do. And it took a lot of work, because it was striking the balance with the journalists to actually make them cover our announcements, but also say the same thing over and over and over again until people hear it. And there's, a saying in politics that like, say it so many times that you want to throw up because you think you've repeated it so many times, and the voter will hear it for the first time. And that's definitely, that was like one of their biggest challenges in the campaign, but I think we struck that balance really well, and I think that's part of our success.
I think I would agree with you, as somebody who, I told you my mom is from Manitoba and I have a lot of family there, so I was a little more invested than the average. I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia, watching the Manitoba election. But I think that this healthcare message that came out of the NDP camp was so clear. And you're totally right. It was just repeated over and over again. And that repetition is what really pierces through the media cycle. I couldn't agree more. Logan, what, in your mind, what were those messages from the PC camp during this campaign?
So where do I start? So look, I'll be honest. There wasn't a vision. There wasn't a plan. Like Emily said, there was a lot of work put into the idea that they were going to make this election about healthcare, and they were successful. I think there was an attempt at the beginning of the campaign to make it about taxes. But look, I respect that, because and there was also a push to, a bit at the end of August and the beginning of the campaign in September to make it a bit of, about crime and public safety. But when you looked at the, issues that mattered to Manitobans, yes, those are on the list, but they are not in the top three. The top three are healthcare overwhelmingly, and that's why, the NDP and decided to make that their campaign. The second was cost of living, groceries, hydro bills. Again, lots of announcements from the NDP on cost of living. And the third was housing affordability. Taxes.
I just want to interject there, because it seems strange to me that the PCs, a conservative government, wouldn't go after those last two things and really own them, because we see across Canada more right-wing governments that are really owning those narratives, especially federally, on the affordability, the economy, those types of things. Why didn't the PCs go after those things that honestly, highlight who they are in most campaigns?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. Like it doesn't make sense to me as someone that's been involved in central campaigns and understands the Manitoba voter and the way that the seats are structured and what type of voters that you need to get in order to win the election. They did have, I will say, they did have a very good announcement on the second day of the campaign in terms of housing affordability, which was the removing the land transfer tax for first-time home buyers. Like, that was a great announcement. Great policy. A lot of other provinces.
As someone who just bought a house like 4 days after they announced it, I was like, God damn it! If they win,
you voted PC.
Let's make it retroactive.
You voted PC. That's what you're saying.
So and look, that was a great announcement. The thing with tax cuts and stuff, they ultimately, eventually kind of it's too complicated. Tax cuts are great as long as you can explain them in a way that the average voter can understand. And I think that was a bit of a struggle. They were very complicated announcements, and I'm sure they were, they're great policies, but it's too complicated for an election. And so, and then, there was obviously other things that happened in the campaign, which I'm sure we'll get to. And then they've put Manitoba on the map, and everyone's paying attention, and not for a positive reason.
All right, let's just dive into it. Let's bring it up. So I think what you're talking about is the question over the landfill search. Yeah. And for those who don't know, there has been a request to have the Prairie Green, is that correct?
Correct.
Prairie Green landfill searched for the remains of 2 missing Indigenous women. And the NDP committed to doing it in this campaign. The federal government has now contributed hundreds of thousands of dollars to ensuring that we not to doing it, but to looking into being able to do it to see if it's possible. But the PCs in Manitoba came out and said, we will not do it. And that was based on workers' rights. They said it was too risky, and environmental issues. Am I correct in those?
Yeah, I mean, that was the, prior to the campaign, when there was a feasibility study done, the federal government paid for that. And the provincial government decided to not move forward with the search of the landfill. It started off, I would say, being about safety and workers' rights, and it's dangerous because there's lots of factors. The feasibility study said it was possible. It happens all the time. And then the conversation changed, and it wasn't about safety or environmental issues or anything like that anymore. It actually became about money. And it was too expensive to do. I'll be honest, as a PC voter, I was extremely uncomfortable. It made me I don't even like talking about it. It makes me feel sick.
You're not the only one that I've heard that from. I mean, I've been in touch with a lot of people that are involved with the PCs. My natural political home comes from the more conservative side. And so I have a lot of friends that are involved with the Manitoba PCs, and they said the same thing. What were we thinking? Why did we do this? People couldn't understand it. Why, Emily, was it such a priority for this NDP party during the campaign to take that stand? So what word am I looking for? They were on it. They said, we're doing it, and that's it.
It's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Logan said it's the right thing to do.
I mean,
and it is. Yeah.
Yeah. It is the right thing to do. I mean, so much of this was driven by Wab, to be honest with you. I remember when it was released by the RCMP that they believed that the remains were in the landfill. And then I remember when this turned into blew up into a big media issue in the summertime. And I remember talking to Wab on the phone, and he was at a Sundance when it happened. And so, that's typically a very sacred time for him that we try not to bother him during. And he took the call because he always takes the call. He'll never stop taking the call. But we discussed it, and he was very clear that this was something that, how could he be where he was and not think that these women's lives were valuable? So I think he drove this from the very beginning. And we also do have some very active politicians in our party on the MMIWG2S file, Nahani Fontaine and Bernadette Smith and Amanda Laughlin. And they all have lived experience with this, or they know someone very intimately who's experienced this. So it's definitely something that's always been a priority for our party. And that's part of the Indigenous relationship or Indigenous leadership that we have. But also, I think it's an issue that was I don't want to say it was blown up by the rhetoric, but as Logan said, it's something that has happened before. People have searched landfills for human remains
in
before.
BC, we had Willie Picton.
I mean, in our other landfill, they had already found other women.
That's right.
This was essentially continuing a search, not starting a new one.
That's right. Yeah. So it can be kind of I think it was a bit of a snowball effect of the issue. But, to be honest, the PCs took a really hard stance on it early on in the summer. And, now hindsight is 2020. I look back on that, and it's hard not to think that they were trying to set it up as a wedge issue in the campaign.
Yeah, obviously.
Because a lot of the timing was sort of lining itself up for that. At one point there was going to be a City of Winnipeg Council vote on it that was going to line up the day before Orange Shirt Day. There was a lot of moving pieces where you could kind of see the PC government trying to delay action on it so that they could basically hold a referendum on it in the campaign. At least that's what it looks like from our perspective. Who knows if that's really what the case was. But so, it was clear to us that this was something that we were going to have to deal with in the campaign and that we needed to have a clear stance on it. And Wab's commitment has always been that that he had spoken to the people who had written the first feasibility study, and that they had told him that it was possible, and it was possible to do it safely, and that it was possible to do it for less money than the media was talking about. And so that was kind of our guiding light.
It's kind of unbelievable to even use that line about money.
Yeah.
To think of all the things we spend money on.
Well, yeah. And I just,
yeah, I mean, it's like, what's the value of the human life?
Yeah.
Like it.
And just, I almost feel like I have to apologize because I feel horrible for those families that, of those women that are believed to be like, like I couldn't imagine doing that to a family like who is, desperate to have their loved one found. And now it's turned into this, a political ad. Like that is just, it's unfair. And I wasn't involved in the central campaign, so it is what it is, but that's how I feel.
I was talking about it a little bit on TV the other day, and I was saying, the PCs will have to wear that policy decision for until the next campaign, when hopefully they can, redefine themselves or come up with, bring in new people that will help to maybe change the way that they're doing politics. I was talking about the human side of politics and how they really missed the mark on that. What do you think it'll take, Logan, to rejuvenate the PCs from this point?
It's a full rebuild, and I think it's start fresh. There was a lot of people that had worked on the last two campaigns that were not involved in this campaign. It was a completely different group than the people that had took you to, two historic majorities back to back. None of them were involved in this campaign. So it's kind of a weird kind of dynamic, weird thing there. Look, I think we need, there's a few things we need to do. One is that we need to elect an interim leader and have a steady hand there, someone that's going to see through the leadership process, a party rebuild. We need to take a close look at our party. There's going to be, I'm sure there's a campaign debt, and I'm sure there's, an audit that should be done. And we need to do a postmortem and look at where did things go wrong. And that's the only thing that you can do in order to kind of learn from your mistakes. I hope we bring in, some new people or maybe some old people, because those people weren't involved, and we can, kind of look at the party, have a good leadership race, and really kind of rebuild from the ground up. It happens to every party after a pretty big loss. And I think that, if anyone's listening, we should not rush into a leadership race. We need to take the time to get it right.
Yeah. And, I can feel that. I've been part of parties that have experienced very big losses. And I can feel where you are mentally at this point, a couple of days post-election. But parties get rebuilt and new people come in and new ideas come in. And that's also an exciting part of politics when you have we can look at the federal Liberals as one example, losing the majority of their seats and then coming back as a majority government. It happens, and it feels like a lifetime in politics waiting for your government to come back. But when they do,
it can take almost 8 years.
That's right.
I mean, the NDP was facing a similar kind of devastation.
Yes.
Just 2 terms
exactly.
ago.
Okay, so that's a good segue, because I want to quickly dive into Wab himself. And you talked a little bit about branding and the NDP campaign. I mean, Wab being the first First Nations premier in this country, is historic. It's exciting. I think that a lot of people are feeling the energy in Manitoba right now. I know I am a huge political nerd, and I watched the Manitoba campaign, and since he was elected, I've had a lot of people that had no interest in Manitoban politics say to me, "Hey, that guy in Manitoba is really exciting." So I think that like the national narrative on his election has been really exciting. Maybe you can talk to us about the significance of his election, Emily, and also I don't want to say what are the plans for your government, because it's day one, not even. You're not even in.
I mean, like figure out my government email.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's good. That's a really big step. So why don't you talk to us about Wab and who he is, and kind of the branding around him and the NDP during this campaign?
Sure. Well, listen, like Wab is a gifted communicator. That is his greatest strength. I think that he is an incredible, smart person who absolutely should be in politics. He's an inherent strategic thinker. He's always thinking a couple steps ahead. He is a gifted communicator who really understands that a good policy means nothing if you can't communicate it to a wider audience, which is something that not all politicians can really wrap their heads around. And then I also think that he is someone who has like a deep drive. He is very eager and driven to get it right and to work hard. And so I've worked in campaigns where the leader is not necessarily, they don't want to start super early in the morning. They don't want to take that late night meeting. They don't want to read that long briefing book. But that's, to me, like Wab has always had more energy and stamina than the staff around him. And he's a little exhausting to be around all the time, honestly. And so I think that he's just someone who was like, I couldn't think of a better person who could become premier. And he absolutely fits and lives up to, frankly, a lot of the hype that has been around him lately. Like he's a fantastic leader. He's going to be a fantastic premier. He'll make mistakes. We all make mistakes, but I think that he's really has like a sophisticated understanding of government, and he has like a clear vision and ideas for the future, and he knows how to bring people along. And he's also, I would say, like invested in sort of tackling some of the more like 40,000 feet problems we see in politics. So things like, the left losing working people, things like, a response to climate change that brings people in every industry along, and families from every income level along, a vision for healthcare that isn't just about poaching talented workers from every province and kind of robbing each province of talent. So I think he has like he's a thoughtful person who is wanting to make change on like a much bigger scale than just even in Manitoba.
Those are some very large goals, and I really hope lofty goals. And it's really always exciting to be a new government and to have that hope and that aspiration to do better.
Of course. Yeah.
And I hope that we can have you back in a year and you can tell us how things are going.
Oh my God.
Or maybe Wab wants to come on.
I'm in the suit.
Can we have the new premier?
I don't make any commitments, but
I tried to our listeners.
He's always open to
I
requests.
tried. We'll put our name on the list, on his waiting list.
Yeah.
He's probably got a few right now. I want to wrap with one final question to Logan. Any bets on who the next leader is?
Oh, that is a hard one. I mean, we've had, Brian Pallister, who at the time was, outside of the party, and he was a federal MP and made the, I mean, it was an uncontested leadership race, but, he made the jump from federal to provincial. So we kind of had that experience, doing that. And then you have, Heather Stephenson, who had been elected and is elected since 2000. So someone from within the party. So we've seen kind of both. I think it's, to be honest with you, We have, 22 members, and a lot of them are new, right? That's the other thing. We had a lot of people that just chose to not run again, retire. They had been elected for quite a long time. So there's a lot of fresh faces to our caucus. So it will be interesting to see how it shakes out. But I honestly think that it could be anyone.
Oh, maybe it'll be you.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Leader Logan.
Premier Ross. I love it. All right. Well, I'm very excited for one to see how both of your parties do over the course of the next few years. I sincerely want to wish luck to both of you. The PCs will need it, and as will the new NDP government. Emily, good luck to you on your first day as once you're sworn in. Do we have a swearing in date yet for the new premier?
Not yet, but coming up. I know I'm sort of yesterday we got set up with like our tell a quick story. Yesterday we got set up with our like government phones, and there's so many. I'm like being handed like there's an iPad and a laptop and another phone. And I'm so tired. And the guy is like explaining to me, he's like, so your iPad has a phone number and your phone has a phone number. And I'm like, I have 3 phone numbers. And like, I almost started crying, just being like, I'm so overwhelmed.
Oh my gosh. And it's only going to get worse from here.
I had 4 phones at one point, not in Manitoba when I was in Ontario. So I get it.
I have never had more than 2 phones, but I guess I've been out of politics for a few years. So that's now you get 4.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, that's crazy. Anyways, okay. Well, very exciting times in Manitoba. I really want to thank Emily Couttes and Logan Ross for joining us tonight to give us the debrief on the Manitoba campaign that took place this week. And hopefully we will talk to you both soon. Thank you both so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
What a show. Some political philosophy, some political history. We really do it all on this podcast. I want to thank our guest co-host, Sarbjit Kaur, for joining us. That was a lot of fun. And I also want to thank our friends from Manitoba who shared their experiences working on the campaign.
We also want to thank Danny Horowitz and Jonathan Panetta for our theme music and Tim Truax for production help. Next week, Parliament is on break week, which means so are we. We want to wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving and note that our next episode will be coming to you on October 20th. We will speak to you then.